What shapes you as you live your life, year by year, season by season, day by star-born night, forms and fashions, sculpts and stipples you. There's the nature of the landscapes and cultures you move and deep breathe through, the weather of elements, relationships, calms and storms of the heart you're exposed to, the workings and playings of your mind, your dreams, the transits of the planets, the music of the natural world, all shaping and reshaping you, slightly to finely, gently to greatly, as you live and love through every part of your beautifully pliant life. Welcome, and thank you for leaning in to the latest Floating Poetry broadcast, the 46th in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live by the free-form sea from Watch Hill, Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Inviting you this week to ponder what shapes us, shapes you, from the outside in, through culture to family to nature, and from the inside out, through what we believe and how we feel, to ways we see, think, and choose. I've curated cultural commentary, poetry, and contemplatings for us of various kinds, and poetry of various kinds, mine and others, that speak to, in some cases sing to, this theme. So let's dip for a while into some of this very rich and ripe territory. I thought we might lead in with Alain de Botton, who is runs the School of Life in the UK. And I think that's the actual title of their site. Very interesting organization and programs and printables. So he's talking about emotional intelligence, and I thought that might be an interesting way for us to begin. Emotional intelligence, the knack of our species, he says, lies in our capacity to transmit our accumulated knowledge down the generations. The slowest among us can, in a few hours, pick up ideas that it took a few rare geniuses a lifetime to acquire. Yet what is distinctive is just how selective we are about the topics we deem it possible to educate ourselves in. Our energies are overwhelmingly directed toward material, scientific, and technical subjects and away from psychological and emotional ones. Much anxiety surrounds the question of how good the next generation will be at math, very little around their abilities at marriage or kindness. We devote inordinate hours to learning about tectonic plates and cloud formations, and relatively few fathoming shame and rage. The emotionally intelligent person knows that love is a skill, not a feeling, and will require trust, vulnerability, generosity, humor, sexual understanding, and selective resignation. The emotionally intelligent person awards themselves the time to determine what gives their working life meaning, and has the confidence and tenacity to try to find an accommodation between their inner priorities and the demands of the world. The emotionally intelligent person knows how to hope and be grateful while remaining steadfast before the essentially tragic structure of existence. The emotionally intelligent person knows that they will only ever be mentally healthy in a few areas and at certain moments, but is committed to fathoming their inadequacies and warning others of them in good time, with apology and charm. There are few catastrophes in our own lives or in those of nations that do not ultimately have their origins in emotional ignorance. So, thank you, Alain de Botton, sort of pointing us toward the notion of developing as best or better we can our emotional intelligences, our emotional IQs. Here's writer Jeanette Winterson, and I felt also an entry point for our ponderings would be our cultural and personal narratives, the stories that scribe us one way or another. She said one of the things the story teaches us is this: read yourself as a fiction as well as a fact. When I was growing up poor in a poor place with a pair of Pentecostal parents who were waiting for Jesus to return and roll up time and space like a scroll, I never thought my life was narrow or my chances bleak. I thought I was Heathcliff, Huck Finn, Hotspur, Aladdin, the big bad wolf, the fish with the golden ring. And later, when I had left home at 16 and was living in a mini, I had my favorite books stashed in the boot, and whenever I could be in the library, I was there. This wasn't a fantasy world or escapism, though it was an escape. It was the hidden door in the blank wall. Open it. I opened the book and went through. The escape into another story reminds us that we too are another story. Not caught, not confined, not predestined, not only one gender or passion. Learning to read yourself as a fiction as well as a fact is liberating. It is the difference between energy and mass. Mass is the beloved object, the world we can touch and feel, but mass is also the dead weight in ourselves and others. Shifting the dead weight takes energy, but at its atomic core, the dead weight is energy. Transforming mass into energy, energy into mass is what creative work is about. An idea becomes embodied. A tragedy is released. Thank you, Jeanette Winterson. So, we have life stories. We also have life questions. And this poem by Linda Hogan, to me, touches on the open questions we have as we live our lives that in themselves exert a force on how we evolve and enlighten. And I'm thinking, too, of course, of the great Maria Rilke and Letters to a Young Poet, and telling him it was important to live the questions and not always look for the answers. And one day, far into the future, you may discover yourself living the answers. So, Linda Hogan's poem, Innocence. There's nothing more innocent than the still, unformed creature I find beneath soil, neither of us knowing what it will become in the abundance of the planet. It makes a living only by remaining still in its niche. One day it may struggle out of its tender pearl of blind skin with a wing or with vision leaving behind the transparent. I cover it again, keep laboring, hands in earth, myself a singular body, watching things grow, wondering how a cut blade of grass knows how to turn sharp again at the end. This same growing must be myself, not aware yet of what I will become in my own fullness inside this simple flesh. Thank you, Linda Hogan. Here's a poetic perspective on what we learn by living and how it shifts parts of our seeing and relating to the world around us. This is the poet Terence P. Paré, The Shape of Things. In high school, I learned to shape opinions into squares, the building blocks of matter, of life, of history, stackable, storable, neat like Tupperware. I made a world of toys. In college, I learned in circles, a rounded education, the Platonic sphere, the cycles of things, Hegel's spiral. I squeezed the universe into a ball, rolled it toward the overwhelming question, and it rolled right back again, undisturbed. These days, I think in wavy lines and arcs, the koala bear's opposable thumb, a lick of moon, the sleeping cat, my lover's hair spilled over the pillow, sloppy, fluid things that don't add up, tigers in the snow. Chaotic, mostly living, they'll die or burst from time to time, like stars. Thank you, Terence Paré. Well, a few of you know, but most of you would not know that I came into the world way ahead of schedule. I was born wildly early, a super preemie, 6+ weeks, and it was pretty dicey in the year of 1958 in terms of prenatal care or postnatal care, natal care. And I was in an incubator for as long as that, if not longer, though I'm personally convinced it was actually a percolator, the way I turned out, but that's another story. That experience definitely shaped me, and years back I thinking about it because it had occurred to me in different feeling places and moments over my life, and made an effort to crystallize it a bit in a poem. And this is the poem, The Isolette, which is what they called the incubators then. Once I incubated under glass, not pheasantly or pleasantly, as the rather charming French-sounding word à la noisette, gaufrette, mignonette would make it sound. I arrived 6 weeks early, perhaps in some great hurry to land in the world, get out in the open, only to be boxed in, albeit transparently, for quite a while, watching the world float by. Over time, half a century and change since, I've wondered if this is why I became a deep listener, keen observer, voicer of life and love in poetry and imagery, from a starting point of great isolation to open, eager, liberating exultation. The Isolette. I'd like us to look at and think about ways language itself shapes us, shapes you from the start, whatever your language happens to be, and two, or your native language anyway. How different languages that we come across or have learned have their own sounds and shapes, mouth shapes and other shapes, and influences on both the speaker and the listener. And I was thinking of the language that we all first hear, whatever it's told in, whether it's Swahili or English or French or what have you, is the mother tongue. The one we heard, learned in utero, from the first one that used it to speak to us, shape vowels for us, tell stories that glowed, sang lullabies that soothed. As we tuned our ears, began to tune ourself, our near-born, newborn self, new-made senses to the world around us, and fountain forth words of wonder, of sorrow, of tenderness and gladness alike, in the shared language of our shared nature, our dear mother tongue. And, a little winter water. Consider your birth, all of our births, and how we literally begin, and symbolically I'd say too, all innocence, all potential, a fresh canvas, and how we arrive in that outer world at first and are received in that world. So formative for every single person ever born and ever will be born. And this was a poem that I wrote for my then just arrived grandson, Leonardo, and his mother and father back in 2007. Nato al dente, born al dente. Faster than it takes to make linguine for the vongole, or open oysters, or place a phonograph needle onto an old recording of Caruso returning to Sorrento, before the moon had time to rise and shine its nose and cheeks for the occasion, and anyone had time to think past you being a beautiful boy or girl, but the universe, knowing all, found plenty of time to wink. And while millions of men and women put on their pajamas and put out the lights to go to bed, ecco e presto, you were born, perfectly al dente, into the warm and welcoming bowl of your mother's breasts and your father's arms, into a future bright with family, friends, and feasts, into a home with heart, all sunny side up, and an open wide world, and our now even more wonder-filled lives. Born al dente. I hope he's doing well out there, that young man. I like Khalil Gibran's poem from the Prophet on children and parenting. He said to a young mother who wanted advice on those topics, he responded to her, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. Isn't that beautiful? Well, on this note of birth, and soon coming spring is rebirth. Of course, rebirth of the landscape here in the Northeast and elsewhere, and a nod to those renewings and greater regrowings we can have. And this was a poem I wrote for a spring equinox a few years back, and it's called Re:"Birth. 2 words. Rebirth. First breath to last breath. What flows between is the reveling and leveling of living, the many faces and found graces of loving, the transcendental moments of great epiphanies, deep ecstasies, timeless memories, the embodiments of you becoming, even now, ever new, ever free, to spring. So let us all find our wherewithal, inner and outer wherewithal, to spring forth, whatever way we desire to dream to. Obviously, very formative and transformative can be our different kinds of relationships, friendships, partnerships. And the pioneering immunologist Esther Sternberg wrote a book called The Balance Within, The Science Connecting Health and Emotions. And she said in that, somewhere in our brains we carry a map of our relationships. It is our mother's lap, our best friend's holding hand, our lover's embrace. All these we carry within ourselves when we are alone. Just knowing that these are there to hold us if we fall gives us a sense of peace. Cradled, rooted, connected are words we use to describe the feeling that comes of this knowledge. Social psychologists call this sense embeddedness. The opposite is perhaps a more familiar term. We call it loneliness. Thus, a person sitting by herself or himself in a room may appear to others to be quite alone, but that person, if embedded, will have a world of relationships mapped inside their mind, a map that will lead to those who can be called on for nurture and support in time of need. But others, the Gatsbys among us, might be among a crowd of dozens and yet feel very much alone. Many pieces of great literature have in fact tapped into this sense of disconnectedness. Our sense that powerful forces beyond our bodies link us to others is so ingrained that we use phrases such as, quote, times that bind, family dies, D-Y-E-S, and bonding to describe those intangible connections. And the emotions they evoke are among the greatest forces that affect our hormonal, our nerve chemical, and our immune responses, and through these, our health and our resistance to disease. I'm drawn back to, once more, to John O'Donohue's, on other themes I've brought this in, but yet again, here it is. I've explored it with listeners is in terms of aliveness and love and friendship. And here, in terms of things that really form us deeply often or can alter us in beautiful ways, is the way he frames it at its most elemental, love as ancient recognition. Real friendship or love is not manufactured or achieved by an act of will or intention. Friendship is always an act of recognition. This metaphor can be grounded in the clay nature of the human body. When you find the person you love, an act of ancient recognition brings you together. It is as if millions of years before the silence of nature broke, your lover's clay and your clay lay side by side. Then in the turning of the seasons, your one clay divided and separated. You began to rise as distinct clay forms, each housing a different individuality and destiny. Without even knowing it, your secret memory mourned your loss of each other, while your clay selves wandered for thousands of years through the universe. Your longing for each other never faded. This metaphor helps to explain how in the moment of friendship, two souls suddenly recognize each other. There's an awakening between you, a sense of ancient knowing. Love opens the door of ancient recognition. You enter, you come home to each other at last. Thank you, John O'Donohue, and that's from his book of Celtic wisdom. I muse and observe often what others can bring out in us, can bring forth from us, can activate parts of us that only certain people seem to be able to do that, and others other parts, and what they can reveal or help us reveal inside ourselves, and how marvelous and mysterious that often is, and likewise what we can do and bring out naturally, sometimes surprisingly in others in our lives in welcome ways. I encourage you to contemplate this. Where does that happen from others bringing forth something of you and you of them? Esther Sternberg once more talks about a little bit more about relationships. Apropos, a relationship is built on strings of moments that our mind has pulled out from where they were stored in memory, moments and memories that come with emotions attached. Memories spliced together like this in a seamless thread make a relationship seem continuous and whole. So after not seeing a childhood friend for years, we can pick up where we left off, as if no time at all had intervened. In this way, too, our relationships can be sustained in thought during long absences, parents away from adult children, long-distance lovers, commuting husbands and wives. But the same capacity of the brain to forge this chain of memory can lead to difficulties if one member evolves past where the other's memory left off. At times, one small corner of that map can swell and grow, reverberate, and suddenly seem to take over our entire world. We fall in love, we are abandoned, we become envious, we hate. The persons who are the object of such feelings can take on gigantic proportions in our minds and dominate our whole social and emotional outlook, coloring every corner of our lives until, through monumental effort or simply through gradual erosion of time, they recede again to their rightful place and size. This led me to think of family and parents that we're touching on, and how they model for us, often just by their being, right? Not in any particular way, but sometimes very consciously. So modeling of all kinds, good, odd, lasting, and otherwise. So that osmosis that happens, right, when we're around them. And I thought of this poem I'd written for my father some time back. And we all have our had some relationships with fathers, and some very complicated. Mine was fairly complicated in some ways, and also remarkable and uncomplicated in others, and this is more on the latter end of it, and it's called I Loved Him, from my father. For his whimsy, for his wildly vivid memory, surpassing storytelling, for fiercely, if unintrospectively, being his own man, always with great elan, his old-school manliness, laced with a surprising love for masterful music, fine art, dancing, tending roses. The way before the empire he built declined and fell. He'd drink life like Ulysses to the lees, savor the winds and waves of all adventures. These ways, I loved him, and the summer days we'd sail the ocean and head of the bay together, father and son, his sunny, salt-haired boy. So, toast to him in the ether, and all the fathers living and also in the ether. Here's another one. This next was about the father of a very dear soul brother, Jack Hall, out in California. And it was from stories about him I heard and led me to this particular poem, to write this, that gives us a slice of a life and clues about it. It's called ESSO, E-S-S-O, for John Hall. And for anybody back a little older, ESSO was the what's called Exxon now, but it used to be called ESSO. "Fill her up," said the long-legged man with the large red mustache when he pulled up to the shiny pump in his big-finned Pontiac. Always a Pontiac man, only an ESSO man. Fill her up. He loved saying those words being at the wheel of his own urbane, suburban life, inside the sealed envelope of his 1950s, 60s self. As peak-capped men filled the yawning tank and nimbly washed the Scarsdale wide windshield, his wife beside and tow-headed children behind, waiting patiently to drive on. And so, well, not only did my father come to mind and heart, but my mother did. And talk about one of the greatest tectonic influences on us. I certainly would say mothers are right up at the top of that, pretty much. And years after my mother sailed off into the stars, I came to this viscerally felt place, one it took time to enter, years to enter and appreciate and ultimately embody. It's called the mother ship, mother-ship, for my mother. When you left your body, with it went a lifetime of mothering, of carrying your children along. All of us now since sailed off to our own open waters, to many salty, rising, sometime roiling seas, went to a tangible, irreplaceable body of your floating, leading memories, seen, felt moments of each of our emerging, verging, diverging lives, from our births to your sudden death, and all your joyful, hopeful, even rueful reveries. With your sinking out of sight and time forever, went a whole body of you and some body of us. Here's a poem on marriage and life partnership, such a big life-changing experience. Those kinds of relationships, as many of you know or have known, as I've known. Margaret Atwood's poem, Habitation. Marriage is not a house or even a tent. It is before that, and colder. The edge of the forest, the edge of the desert, the unpainted stairs at the back where we squat outside, eating popcorn, the edge of the receding glacier where, painfully and with wonder at having survived even this far, we are learning to make fire. Well, after my marriage was an experience of great, great love that was not only a rare gift, but an opening to a far deeper and freer place of being and loving that I inhabited joyfully, and took me to a whole other level of being. So here's a poem toward that, 1,001 Nights of Sun. Over these years of nights entwined together, often enshrined in and despite darkness, radiance, sun-like effulgence, of pure bodies and souls, of deep ecstasies, deeper harmonies, truths and clarities, where sacred closeness to self, selves, and source removed all thought, all distance, dissolved any reluctance to take wing, to fly ever so brightly, wildly free. Well, I feel that the soul mates and soul friends we encounter, those anamkaras that John Donahue was talking about, for however long or short, allow us to create an alchemy that results in something naturally and beautifully remarkable. This is called sowing, S-O-W-I-N-G. If I'm the packet of seeds, you're the soil, sun, and watering can. And there's the shapings of just romance and sweetness and devotion, right, in relationships that color us and color our days and memories. And this is a delightful piece by Robert Hedin, H-E-D-I-N, My Mother's Hats. She kept them high on the top shelf, in boxes big as drums, bright, crescent-shaped boats with little fishnets dangling down, and wore them with her best dress to teas, coffee parties, department stores. What a lovely catch, my father used to say, watching her sail off into the afternoon waters. Well, like the orientings that come from new relationships or maturing relationships, there's the reorienting of life after divorce. And I've certainly had that experience. And It was painful on lots of levels and powerful on many others that needed to take my life in a very different direction, different shape. So no regrets, the pain was hard, but no regrets about the ultimate outcome. And I come back to Joseph Stroud's poem about this, written on the island of Karpathos, Greece. Crossing the island, heat, and the sky a flame of sapphire, an ocean of fire, even rocks blazing, the earth a rush of coals, Aegean summer, the air still, the day dead center in the sun, the world without breath. Even the goats, drinking light all morning, have descended to the shade of a cistern, while out there the blue of the ocean and the other blue of sky come together in that place where the gods descend to this world and enter the heavy honey of the body. And it was on this day when I set out into the core of light, wondering what it would bring, for I knew for once and for good my marriage was over, and henceforth there would be only these excursions into the sun, into the body, and the world would exact its praise of basil or goats, or the smell of thyme and the resin and the gold pitch of pine. And all the shelters of the spirit began crumbling within me as I dismantled the man I was, learning to replace the old belief of Latin with the new tongue of this world, the tongue of rock and mountain and memory, of the woman washing her hair on the terrace in the granite light. As I went through the day to the other end of the island, where the wedding guests had butchered a goat and roasted the meat over a fire, in a noon so bright I couldn't see the flames, as if sunlight were searing the flesh. And the bride looked upon it all, and found it to her liking, as the groom carved the meat, passed it around, and we ate of the world. And so it would continue. Thank you, Joseph Stroud. In the spirit of Stroud, is the belief, for me anyway, in my book, that heartbreak can allow us a different choice, open an incredible other path that we couldn't have seen necessarily. But when things open, then they open, and the wisdom is to follow them in the best way that brings our best self out. Let your heart break is this piece. Not into darkness, a hard stop or sorrow, but into sunlight, a wild gallop and song. Well, one of the things that we know, sometimes very dramatically shapes people that we know or ourselves, is illness. And Greg Lavoie, in his book Callings, has a bit of a piece on this, which I thought was extremely interesting. I hadn't really thought of it this way, but he said, we are not so much responsible for our illnesses, says the author and Buddhist teacher Stephen Levine, as we are responsible to our illnesses. The question is not so much what to do about our suffering, but what to do with it. Being responsible to an illness, he says, means being willing to relate to it, have a full-on experience of it, and investigate not just the pain, but also your reaction to it. It means letting it communicate with you rather than merely trying to subdue it. Though that's certainly the natural reflex, it probably is an accurate mirror of how we resist whatever is painful and unpleasant in our lives, whatever doesn't go our way, whatever makes us feel out of control. It's a mirror to how we regard not only the physical, but also the emotional symptoms in our lives. Our sulfurous marital fights, our obsessions with money or love, our wayward kids, our debts piled up to here, that low-grade anxiety running like a white noise through our days, the constant feeling of something missing, to say nothing of the symptoms scattered around the body politic. This sense of responsibility cannot be soft-pedaled. It will try your most grim self-restraint, for instance, to lie in bed and just let sciatic pain be while it yowls at you. But there is knowledge, and therefore power, in following its migrations, plotting its geometry, and noticing how sometimes it burns, sometimes it vibrates, sometimes it spills boiling oil down the legs, and sometimes it spreads hot coals in the pan of the pelvis, and always it makes you feel so vulnerable. It would be so much easier just to grab a fistful of aspirins, wash it down with an immediate appointment at the chiropractor's, and get back to business as usual, which might be what landed you on your back to begin with. Thank you, Greg Lavoie. His book is marvelous. I haven't even finished it. I already know I'm going to be rereading it. Well, illness. I've experienced not not dramatically myself, but loved ones around me, close friends, family, extreme close-ups in some case, and those that fell ill, and sometimes fatally, and now that informed not only my larger feelings about life, but about the world, and expanded them ultimately, I'd say in a good way. This was a piece I'd written in the Yucatan when my father-in-law was dying of lung cancer. There was no way out. And he went far beyond what anybody imagined. I think they gave him less than 6 months to live, and he surprised everybody by going 5 years plus. Damn courageous fellow. Beautiful spirit. And so I wrote this as I mused on how that could coexist with the other side of it, the dark with the light. It's called The Tropic of Cancer. How curious to be in two of these tropics at once. One warm and wonderful, the other dark and sorrowful. Each world with its own terrain, yet between them a latitude and longitude where flowers grow. So speaking of mortality, just to adopt more, the physicist with a different lens, the physicist and writer Alan Lightman proposes, if against our wishes and hopes we are stuck with mortality, does mortality grant a beauty and grandeur all its own? Even though we struggle and howl against the brief flash of our lives, might we find something majestic in that brevity? Could there be a preciousness and value to existence stemming from the very fact of its temporary duration? And I think of the night-blooming cereus, a plant that looks like a leathery weed most of the year, but for one night each summer, its flower opens to reveal silky white petals which encircle yellow lace-like threads, and another whole flower like a tiny sea anemone within the outer flower. By morning the flower has shriveled, one night of the year, as delicate and fleeting as a life in the universe. Thank you, Alan Lightman. I think of places, literal places I've lived and in childhood and since, and that have affected some of my contours, my inner contours. And what about you and yours, your homes and houses, past and present? Here's a poem by Jane Hirschfield. An hour is not a house. An hour is not a house. A life is not a house. You do not go through them as if they were doors to another. Yet an hour can have shape and proportion, 4 walls, a ceiling. An hour can be dropped like a glass. Some want quiet as others want bread. Some want sleep. My eyes went to the window as a cat or dog left alone does. So, how about landscapes? So we have houses, or they're kind of housescapes or livingscapes. Landscapes have always intrigued me on many levels, visually and words, poetry, and just being in them. And I think of people who grow up in certain, well, sometimes very dramatic settings with mountains or big oceans, prairies, and so on, and how that absolutely has to shape them emotionally, if not more. And so I was thinking of what I could share with us, and I've put together that reflects some of that. And I have a soul brother, and I thought about his early life. He's from New Zealand, and being a product of that landscape that he came from. This was a poem for the New Zealander Henry Hargreaves on his 37th birthday, 5 years back. Man of the land of the long white cloud, man of Oceania, of Te Ika a Maioi, the waters of green stone, man of rich topography, sun and snow-capped peaks, tectonic thoughts, volcanic possibilities, man of grasslands and heartlands, forests and mainland, islands of quietude, rivers of gratitude. I thought of my own childhood and spent summers by the sea always, and where I feel most alive and embraced by nature. Memory of a sea-shaped youth. This was written out in Bridgehampton, 1998. The ocean dazzles the eye today, sparkling as far as the horizon. The water rushes the shore, regathers itself, waits, and rushes again, each time breathing out an essence of innocence. a bouquet of childhood days at the beach. I had one or two more others, but I'm going to slip by those because I want to keep us in a good time frame. I wanted to have refrain Greg Lavoie one more time from his book, Calling on Another Level, when he talks about passion. Passion is a state of love and hunger. It is also a state of enthusiasm, which means to be possessed by a god or a goddess, by a wild thing. One could be possessed by the god of poetry, or the goddess of animals, the god of commerce, or the goddess of home and hearth. If we imagine that calls issue from the gods, then we are as close as we ever get to them, the calls and the gods, when we are enthusiastic. We move toward a kind of divine presence because through our passions, we are utterly present. We are utterly charged and focused. We are oblivious. We forget ourselves, our troubles, our day-to-day living on Mulberry Street lives. We hitch ourselves to something bigger. So ponder for a moment or later how your passions are influencing the course of your life, or would you like them to? Passion is one of mine. When we feel it, ignite with it like a wildfire. When we pour it into an art, a dream, another, like a waterfall, a Niagara Falls of epic inner heat and light that courses forth, blazes and flares forth, filling to overspilling that place of creation or vision or that person with our desire, our potency, our radiancy, with our lust, not just for life, but for a far greater aliveness, a hunger for a larger purpose, a higher frame of reference for our being, a yearning to express our essence and have our deeper presence fully and as immensely found, indelibly felt. Well, if one part of us is a monumental molder, it would have to be the heart, wouldn't it? Our deepest feeling place. And Dorian Laux, L-A-U-X, wrote this poem, Heart. The heart shifts shape of its own accord, from bird to axe, from pinwheel to budded branch. It rolls over in the chest, a brown bear groggy with winter, skips like a child at the fair, stopping in the shade of the fireworks booth, the fat lady's tent, the corn dog stand. Where the heart is an empty room, where the ghosts of the dead wait, paging through magazines, licking their skinless thumbs. One gets up, walks through a door into a maze of hallways. Behind one door, a room full of orchids. Behind another, the smell of burned toast. The rooms go on, sewing room with its squeaky treadle, its bright needles, room full of file cabinets and torn curtains, room buzzing with 1,000 black flies. Or the heart closes its doors, becomes smoke, a wispy lie, curls like a worm and forgets its life, burrows into the fleshy dirt. Heart makes a wrong turn. Heart locked in its gate of thorns. Heart with its hands folded in its lap. Heart a blue skiff parting the silk of the lake. It does what it wants, takes what it needs, eats when it's hungry, sleeps when the soul shuts down. Bored, it watches movies deep into the night, stands by the window counting the street lamps, squinting out one by one. Heart with its 100 mouths open, heart with its 100 eyes closed. Harmonica heart, heart of tinsel, heart of cement, broken teeth, redwood fence. Heart of bricks and boards, books stacked in devoted rows, their dusty spines unreadable. Heart with its hands full. Hieroglyph heart, etched deep with history's lists, things to do. Nearsighted heart, club-footed heart, hard-headed heart. Heart of gold, coal. Bad juju heart, singing the low-down blues. Choir boy heart, heart in a frumpy robe, heart with its feet up reading the scores. Homeless heart, dozing, its back against the dumpster. Cop on the beat heart with its black billy club, banging on the lid. Thank you, Dorian. So change, by choice or circumstance, large or small, especially large, certainly relate to our theme and warrant some thought and feeling. And so here's a piece, Changes of Nature. changes of heart about people and things that once mattered so much, like changes of weather, of seasons, how they take you to such new and different frames of reference, relating to a landscape recast around you, nature reshaped inside you. Well, my poem also toward this and other vital and vitalizing feelings, living vividly, fluidly, is this piece. When you feel everything, nothing is ever the same again. The very molecules inside and around you alter forever. When you feel selectively or not at all, little changes. Maybe a bit of scenery. I know because I've lived both ways. Feeling immensely and freely now, feeling narrowly and tightly then, when less wise in the ways of life and myself. To feel all is not for the faint of heart, but for those ready and willing to engage. Such a full orchestra of feeling is both welcome and liberating, worth hearing, worth experiencing, without allowing all the chords, all the notes and passages. How can the symphony of everything within you really play, greatly resound? All right. Sort of coming into our last segment, as it were. So, cultural conditioning, which is often unconscious, and I suggest that we become more conscious of where and how we've been conditioned, are being conditioned, what conditioning, probably none of it serves us, but I think choosing your own form of shaping yourself is better than being unknowingly and perhaps unwisely shaped by the culture and other people and so on. So I quietly observed a particular species of people on New York's Upper East Side at one point where I was spending time over there. I was mostly a Upper West Side man, but had some reasons to be venturing and observing over in the East. This is called, this is from Lenox Hill, New York City, a few years back. The Chiseled Men. Their features chiseled by generations of Puritan ways, white Anglo-Saxon ways, the ways and weather of the hive, of their Rushmored tribe, of buttoned-up, buttoned-down business, manners, living, and emoting, wry and dry, cocktailing aside, who border on parched and pinched, the etched men and their often pursed and whittled wives, and maybe their chipped-off-the-old-block offspring, who faithfully, consciously, and unconsciously follow their classified code, their urbane creed, their eyes-closed rituals of mating and relating, who hew through lives of long, familiar, particular, and frequently non-sequitur motions no one Upper East of the West Side would even blink at, or even think to question. The Chiseled Men. So as a counterpoint to cultural constriction, let's call it, is to be open, to be unsealed, to allow for your nature to take its most natural course, unimpeded. And you can. If one person can do it, I'm convinced anybody can go there. So hermetically unsealed, this poem. You can try and seal parts of yourself off, isolate your flows, floods of thoughts or feelings from possible or actual breaches of mind or heart. Make yourself airtight, watertight as a way to avert, contain feared damage to your emotional hull. Fine for a seagoing ship, but contrary to nature, unnatural to the natural way of all life-going bodies, whose porousness makes them, counterculturally, more impervious, less sinkable, where everything works as a whole, in a wholly unenclosed flow, free exchange of information, energy, essence, that each of us needs to be fully, freely alive, buoyant, conversant, and ever emergent within, with each, without. Think of all the great and small experiences that have touched, influenced, or otherwise altered part or all of you, somehow emotionally, bodily, or in some other ways. Ray Armantrout wrote this poem, Exit Row. You will buy your life as a series of, quote, experiences to which you will belong. Have a good flight. Do you believe in reproduction? Do you think this upland of clouds, white buttes cut by shadow canyons, shapely and boundless as the body you were promised, will reappear after you're gone? Boarding all zones at this time. There's the play of time and its passing upon us, each in different and distinct ways. I like to embrace it dimensionally, not linearly, not clock time or calendar time, but more spaciously, more generously. And I thought this Alice Oestreicher poem got at some of that. If time is an arrow, it's called Q&A insurance. If time is an arrow, what is its target? If a flexible flyer is the sled I had as a child, when may I become a child again? Do you need help digging the potatoes out of your garden of insults? Do you plan to vote in the next election? Is our country headed in the right direction or the wrong direction, and what did the bulldozer tell the yellow helmet's ear? Which part of your body is like biting into a ripe peach? Which part shames you like a rotten banana? Would you like to find out how to lower your interest rate? When you go to heaven, how old will you choose to be? Will you have cocktails on the well-watered lawn where Bach conducts Bach? Will you still chase after the Grateful Dead? Is your life like air leaking out of a balloon or like rain falling on a pond? ... Dear pox, pocking the surface. ... Can it be like snow falling on the ocean? Can desire drown you like syrup over pancakes? When an ambulance siren wakes you at 3 a.m., do you feel relieved not to be strapped to that stretcher speeding toward the grim unknown? Do you then snuggle next to someone? Are you satisfied with your detergent? Can you name a more perfect irony than the New World Trade Center, sacred icon of capitalism, revered lingam of profit, soaring above the memorial pools of people killed when the first towers fell? Can you describe the scent of dried blood? What about the smell of iron chains in your cell? Can you sing the threnody of the maggots? When I removed my mask, did I frighten you like a drone crossing your sky? Are you satisfied with your auto insurance? When ecstasy approaches, why do you resist? What are you afraid of? Can you please unbutton your shirt now? Okay. Rebecca Solnit, from Recollections of My Non-Existence. Growing up, we say, as though we were trees, as though altitude was all that there was to be gained, but so much of the process is growing whole as the fragments are gathered, the patterns found. Human infants are born with craniums made up of 4 plates that have not yet knit together into a solid dome, so that their heads can compress to fit through the birth canal, so that the brain within can then expand. The seams of these plates are intricate, like fingers interlaced, like the meander of Arctic rivers across tundra. The skull quadruples in size in the first few years, and if the bones knit together too soon, they restrict the growth of the brain, and if they don't knit at all, the brain remains unprotected. Open enough to grow and closed enough to hold together is what a life must also be. We collage ourselves into being, finding the pieces of a worldview and people to love and reasons to live, and then integrate them into a whole, a life consistent with its beliefs and desires, at least if we're lucky. If we thought of each day, each season of growing, each passage of our lives as times of ripening, how might that inspire or serve you or show you dimensions of your mutable self? So here's ripening. It's happening, the ripening, as a person, as a human, as a spirit, and gift. Growing into fullness, bearing deeply beautiful, bountiful fruits from your being, for yourself and your world, though coming to fruition later than imagined, now maturing in ways beyond your imagining. Here's our dear Mary Oliver, and this is our last few now to share till next time. A soulful love letter of a kind to vitality, from her collection, Blue Horses. It's the 4th sign of the zodiac, part 3. I know you never intended to be in this world, but you're in it all the same. So why not get started immediately? I mean, belonging to it. There's so much to admire, to weep over, and to write music or poems about. Bless the feet that take you to and fro. Bless the eyes and the listening ears. Bless the tongue, the marvel of taste. Bless touching. You could live 100 years. It's happened. Or not. I am speaking from the fortunate platform of many years, none of which I think I ever wasted. Do you need a prod? Do you need a little darkness to get you going? Let me be as urgent as a knife then, and remind you of Keats. So single of purpose and thinking, for a while he had a lifetime. Thank you, Mary Oliver. Okay, down to the very last two pieces for us. Flower Song. So as growing beings who can ever grow, ever flow, ever evolve, it's limitless, really is. And the more you do it, the more you realize that's so. What we invite, allow, and let in that serves our well-being, our best-shaped beingness, it matters. So this is Flower Song. When you allow your garden to grow wild with sunlight, to grow open with heart light, everything thrives, everything sings, even the flowers. And to end on an underscore, it was actually written for my cousin and fellow poet, Dee Dee Cummings. It's called When You're Flowing. When your heart is full, when your senses are open to all that's inside and out, when you're singing your life song, dancing your life dance, wild and free, to music only you can once in this lifetime make, everything is poetry. Thank you again, everyone, for listening in and feeling in. Likewise to those who freely contribute to help support these programs and my many other outpourings to nourish spirits, uplift hearts, and spark greater awareness and aliveness through my poetic arts and poetosphere. If you find this or other programs and these kinds of efforts worthwhile, you can donate by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site or by regular mail to me at my P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island 02891. I also invite patrons to bring me their way this year for a month or longer as a private working poet in residence on their property, drinking in and showering out sparks of inspiration. As always, send along your comments, questions, or suggestions. They're always welcome. Email Colin at thepoetorialist.com. Replays are online, as always, for you to revisit or share round. You can also easily subscribe to these broadcasts. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to attuning ourselves to all the dramatic and subtle shapings and reshapings of our lives, the fascinating works in progress that we each are. And as always, good spirits.